What's up, Darren here, and in today's video we are exploring a pretty controversial topic, and that's how to play against donk bets. So a lot of players believe that we should play basically 100% honest against donk bets and against recreationals, but this is actually not true. And today I will show you plenty of spots where we can go kind of bananas against recreationals, because there are several very specific board and flop structures where recreationals are kind of bluff heavy, or where they're having such a range that with very good aggression will actually make them fold way too much. Let's go. Okay, let's start with the overall heads up big blind donking range, and we'll focus on limp odds because this is what we probably will play the most. So if you are raising a lot against recreationals, you'll just need to do the same analysis that I do, right? And as always, I recommend it anyways, that you have a different pool, you might face different recreationals and they might have a different docking range. So today I show you how I analyze these kind of things, that you can go and analyze it yourself in your pool. Okay, so overall donking range is around 23%, but it's not the same on every single board structure. And this is where it gets kind of tricky, right? So on the right side, you see the distribution, the overall distribution. And this is what we worked with most of the time, right? So we said, yeah, most like a donking range is predefined, and it's mainly low pairs and middle pairs, some top pairs, relatively rarely a stronger hand, and then some draws, and here and there also a couple of trashy hands. But why is this tricky? Because this might lead to wrong conclusions, because recreationals are actually playing pretty different on different board structures. And you see it already a little bit here on the left. Here you see, for example, A6 dry board, A6 dynamic, two broadways. The donking frequency is kind of different, right? So that's the first point. You see here in low board dynamic and mid connected and mid unconnected boards, you see more donks, and you see it here on the top as well, right? So if the flop is unconnected, donking frequencies is only 23%. As soon as the flop is connected, it is 30%. But you will also see it at sizings that recreationals use, right? So on low boards they use more big sizings. On high boards they use more small sizings. And I actually love this panel here because you get so many informations out of it. Not only this, but also you can see pretty good where our opponents has quite a lot of trash in it, right? So this is trash, and you see that high board paired seem to be quite trashy, and also on A6 dry boards overall. If you compare like unconnected flops and connected flops, you see that connected flops are way stronger in terms of not having a lot of trash in comparison to unconnected boards. And this is the first very valuable information. Then the second thing that we can take out of this panel is how often our opponent is continuing after he bet the flop, right? And on almost every board structure, it will be between 60 and 70% second barrel. What we don't see is the sizing of the second barrel, right? For example, if someone is betting 1BB, it is very likely that the bet on a turn will also be 1BB, right? So that's pretty typical, 1BB, 1BB. However, as soon as someone is going pot or is betting like 75% or 50%, it's pretty unlikely that the turn bet will be a 1BB bet. It's basically the totally opposite. It will be pretty big sizing usually. And yeah, what you can also see is directly here in this panel, F, C, and R. If you're using hand to note and you don't know what this stands for fold, call, and raise, right? So the first number here will be how often our opponent is folding to a raise. This is how often our opponent is calling to a raise. And this is how often our opponent is raising, so re-raising against the raise. And well, like there's like a pretty some board structures are just pretty good for raising, and some board structures are pretty bad for raising, and we see it directly here. But for example, let's just take one example, and that's high board paired. You see that they are folding against the raise in 54% of the time, calling in 36% of the time, and only raising back in 11% of the time. However, on the other hand, if you have like a mid connected board, right? So like a Jack 10-8, for example, right? Then they are only folding in 32% of the time, calling in 46% of the time, but also re-raising back in 34% of the time. So yeah, and this is really not a board where I would like to slow play a lot, because like our opponent is rarely folding and we are getting it in very frequently on the flop. Same for like low board dynamics. Yeah, so we are basically just getting it in very often on the flop when we are raising. And then there are some kind of tricky boards, for example, like two Broadway boards, still folding like quite a bit. Not raising back. No. Yeah, it is King Queen High Dry. It's very interesting. Here it doesn't seem that our opponent has quite a lot of like trashy hands, but like they're also not folding to raises, which is pretty interesting. Might be due to sample size, but I kind of doubt that. So this is a board structure where our opponents are just calling a lot, but they're also not raising back a lot, only 13% of the time. So this is a pretty specific, and we'll dig deeper into all of these. Yeah. However, so okay. So just sum it up. Let's sum it up a little bit. So yes, high second barrel. We saw it here, right? Around 70% of the time. And a very high re-raising frequency on dynamic flops and low re-raise on dry flops. So we see it here. Overall, flop connected, it's 32% and only 60%. And yeah, the bigger the size, the stronger the range, right? So you see it here. If you use 1BB, this is basically 50% bet size in a limp pot. The top pair is around maybe 20% of the time, right? Our opponent has a top pair. And most of the range is basically low pair, mid pair, and draws, a couple of trashy hands. However, as soon as our opponent's betting like 70% or bigger, then it's almost like 50%, or like let's say 40% of our opponent's range is then actually a top pair. So a big donk, yeah, and the rest is like mid pair and low pair. So low pair plus, like a paired hand, our opponent has in 75% of the time. And then these are draws, right? So a draw is a flush draw or a straight draw, like an open and straight draw. And this is pretty strong. So in 80% of the time, our opponent will have a pretty high equity hand against almost everything that we can have. So against big bets, we can say it already, we should play like big donk bets, except we have a very specific read. We should play very carefully, right? Even folding some like bottom pairs, we will have like really big trouble realizing our equity against these players with like a bottom pair or like a gut shot or something. We should just fold these hands right away, because we also know that we'll face a big second barrel on the turn. And yes, so be careful against big bets. But today we want to focus mainly on small bets, because this is where we can actually exploit our opponent quite heavily. But let's start with these two panels, because you saw I used this a lot, and I didn't use this really at all, because this panel is very useful, but not when you take the overall stats, right? So this is very useful because you can get a good distribution like across the boards. Here, this is just like, this is basically like a hut number, right? So you get the number, it's like 40% call, but you don't know the distribution of what kind of hands are calling or raising or whatever, right? It's just a number. And here, this is just like basically taking all these different board structures and putting it together here. It doesn't really make any sense, right? So the composition, yeah, why the overall donking range is like kind of useless, And this is what basically almost everyone is working with, and I did as well. It's because the composition of the donking range is highly affected by the board structure. And like there are huge differences, not like small differences, like nuances. No, there are big differences in the different board structures. So if we are looking at the overall stats, we are just getting a wrong picture of our opponent's donking range. And today we are going to define basically donking ranges on very specific board structures. Then we have a way better picture of our opponent, and we know where we can attack highly effective. Okay, yeah, but not only the composition, also the fold equity that we have when we raise is different, right? So because on overall we saw, yeah, there's a lot of trash as well, so we might think we have like huge fold equity on basically every board structure, but that's not the case. Okay, but yeah, let's go and explore the different flop structures now. Okay, good. So let's start with the dry flop structures. And well, so this is part one, and these are so a6 dry. What is a6 dry? It's something like a7 deuce, right? So pretty like rainbow ace x, not very connected. Like ace-x, like ace-x connected is like the wheel aces, or like ace 9a with two hearts, etc. So these are connected. But a6 tries are really like three unconnected cards. And on these, our opponents have like quite a lot of trash. You see, it's a pretty low sample on what I have here in this database that I used for this analysis. But this is very typical, right? On ace high boards, they might have an ace sometimes, right? So I wouldn't exclude like top pairs at all. But the main range is like low pair, mid pair, or basically some like pure trash, right? So here, from my experience, the fault equity is very big, and this was one of the rare boards where I actually used this all the time, right? So bluff raising on dry ace-x boards is really a thing. If someone is just betting 1BB, I think we should go for it and raise very frequently. Also very good that our opponent is not raising back here on this board structure very often, so we are getting a fold or a call very often. And yeah, so high board paired, this is like a king 7, queen 5, jack 8, etc. On these kind of board structures, this is like the best for raising, because our opponent here is full of trash. So they are trying to represent the trips, and or they just think, yeah, okay, my opponent doesn't has anything here, which we don't have. So that's actually true, but they also like to fold, right? So they just give up very often. So if someone is betting 1BB, I usually just go for like 2.5, maybe 2.3 or something is also enough. And then they just fold or call. And one of the next slides, we'll also discover how often our opponent is donking again, because this is also influencing our decision here, of course. And well, the low boards, these are very tricky, because yes, you have quite a big trashy part here. However, like how is trash defined on like a low board paired? That's just two overcards basically, right? So if you have like, I don't know, 6-6, 6-6, 6-6-8, or 6-6-9, or 6-6 jack, then most of our opponent's range just has an overcard to the second card, and they just don't believe you too much here, right? So the trash is also like a little bit stronger than on a high board pad. Like on a king, I don't know, like king 6, they just assume that yeah, the range is like way stronger. Yes, so when they donk here on low board paired, it's quite often a pair, like a top pair or a low pair. I actually don't know how they define it on a low board paired. It's basically a two pair, right? And the thing here is we have really low fold equity, right? 27%. It's not a lot of occasions, but there's a big difference between high board paired and low board paired. At least it seems so. Here we need to be like pretty careful. Also, we are getting raised back, or at least so far, I got raised back quite often. So I couldn't even play turns and rivers. And yeah, so let's say there's like a 6-6-9 and the opponent has a 9 and I'm raising, he's not calling. He's raising it back, right? And yeah, so our opponents are getting basically broke pretty loose here on these kind of flop structures as well. Okay, so then we have 2 Broadway boards and King Queen High dry boards. And these are also pretty interesting and tricky. So 2 Broadway boards, it doesn't seem as if our opponent has a lot of trash, right? So only like 14% of the range is trash. I mean, it's a bit, right? But like the distribution is more towards like low pairs and middle pairs. This actually looks a little bit like the overall range. So our overall range that we had is like only kind of true really on like 2 Broadway boards. And here we have a pretty good fold equity, right? 42% right away. And additional to that, our opponent is not raising back very often. Even though he has like quite a bit of like top pairs, but I think these are the ones that are getting raised back or are getting a lead on the turn again, right? So I think here on this board structure, it's very powerful to raise. First, our opponent has trash. And secondly, also like low pairs and some mid pairs that our opponent is probably folding by the river or like by the on the turn or on the river. So I on like 2 Broadway boards, so King Queen 6, King 10 5. Raising is very profitable, right? So going for a 2.5x raise. And when I say raising is profitable, today I will just talk about random 2 cards, right? So about pure bluffs. Today I'm really trying to go bananas on which kind of board structures we can go bananas. So basically any 2 cards and we're just raising with a plan to just pick out the pot, right? So really like old school gambling poker against the recreationals, and I think this is working really good. Yeah, so King Queen High dry is insanely interesting. You see like a lot of top pairs actually, right? So which was quite surprising. I thought they might slow play a little bit more, like on a Queen 6 deuce, but no, they actually donk a lot with the top pairs here, and also with the mid pairs and the low pairs. And the fold equity is only 26%, right? Does this mean we shouldn't raise? Let's see. Let's see. It's tricky. Also trash, like the trash part is pretty low. The question here is basically, do we get to fold out low pairs and middle pairs over 3 streets? And what does influence this decision? And yeah, well, let's talk about this a little bit later. That's it for today. If you are still here and enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and give us a like. If you want to dig deep into the topic, we created a video pack on that, and I'll drop you a 10% discount link in the description. So see you there. Bye bye.